Welcome to episode 125 of Closer Mentality. I'm your host, Julia Mellett. In a time when opening up social media apps can feel like a constant stream of pessimism, devastation, and hopelessness, it's individuals like today's guest who help to reframe and refresh mindsets. Dr. Charron Sumler is a licensed professional clinical counselor, which designates her the ability to dive deeper into clinical mental health disorders. The scope of her practice deals specifically with trauma-informed counseling and crisis management. Her perspective is so niche, yet inexplicably tethered to sport and performance psychology. Dr. Sumler's relationship with sport began in Germany. Her parents used sport as a grounding point for their daughter's emotional and sociological development amid a topsy-turvy military world.
I was born as a military kid. My dad joined the military out of college, and my parents moved to Germany, which is where I was born. They really used sport in my military moving to help me integrate into new communities. So, starting at a really early age, they would just introduce me into new sports when we moved. I played tennis, softball. We were in bowling leagues. And then it was really getting towards high school. My dad retired in San Antonio, where I solidified basketball as both the sport that I was interested in and then had a bit more kind of natural athletic abilities. Softball was not jiving as I was getting taller. It was getting harder to field some of those ground balls, but really landed in basketball in my high school career and would say I kind of specialized a little bit late. I didn't start playing basketball until seventh grade. And in Texas youth sport, it was a bit overwhelming. So I was a very timid youth sport, I would say, entry into basketball.
Dr. Sumler started on an AAU team in middle school. She wanted to make friends in the San Antonio community and gravitated toward competitive organized sport to do so. Surrounded by positions of authority who seemed to prep her teammates for collegiate playing time, Sumler had conversations with her parents about the potential of a similar path.
It was in high school, probably around the time where AAU and travel leagues were becoming more of a conversation for my summertime, and my parents specifically, were open and supportive of me trying different teams, but really wanted me to have a motivation. Like we go to AAU to develop, not just kind of have fun. And so they wanted to know that I was interested in having a collegiate career. And that's when they started asking me, like, is this something you're more serious about? So I'd say that freshman, sophomore year when I was determining if I was going to do extra in the summertime with my time and attention, and decided to, though I was, again, pretty timid and was not sure if I wanted to play college and basketball. I think the military structure had me thinking I wanted to like go be free on some big campus, but ultimately glad I did. I appreciated my parents really trying to get me to identify like my why or my values in playing the sport, and not just kind of going out because I was good at it or just because it was fun. And so the motivation at the time for me was to really build community and connections. But as I started to learn that it could be an avenue to get college paid for, there was a conversation around how much effort and time do we want to put into this. I think what I sit with a lot right now is the access to financial means is hitting youth sports much lower and lower. And so my experience, I was the kind of traditional chose D2. I had a couple of Division I offers, but they were like out in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to be in Austin, Texas. So for that reason, chose a kind of more moderate athletic career. But had this been now, and there's a conversation around, even $100,000 a year, $50,000 a year, I could see my motivations shifting, considering the financial means that I could have in college now.
Sumler attended St. Edward's University, a Division II private Catholic school in Austin. It was there that she suited up as a forward for the Hilltopper women's basketball team. St. Edward's also set the scene for her introduction to psychology.
My mom did not get licensed in counseling, but she got her master's degree in counseling when I was in high school. So I can't help but to think and I majored in psychology freshman year. So I can't help but think the helping professions, supporting people was going to be in the path. It was solidified certainly in my college experience between teammates having a number of experiences. We're talking about Austin, Texas, early 2000s. So just a very vibrant social life and not a whole lot of support. And I'm not even thinking supervision, just we didn't have as many assistant coaches to check in with or nutritionists or strength and conditioning, just role models. And so a lot of the experiences of me and my teammates through that time made me think, man, we should really have somebody who really gets our lifestyle available to us. And I knew we had a counseling center. I was very aware of the counseling center, but there was still a disconnect in if they were going to be the appropriate fit for what I was looking for.
At the time, mental health of athletes was notoriously not on the radar of athletic departments. Sumler saw teammates struggling for purpose and direction and wanted to help her peers. She evaluated the care team available at a Division II institution in the early 2000s and realized that athletic departments were doing a dramatic disservice to their athletes with bare bones support staff. The psychological resources available were predominantly geared toward mental health as it related to performance, and correlations between mental wellness on and off the fields of play were getting neglected. In 2014, she obtained a master's in counseling from Texas State University. It was here that she readjusted the scope of her work in athletics.
With my experience in athletics, knew I wanted to be a counselor in athletics, but at the time it was still pretty heavily focused on sports psychologists. And so I focused my kind of graduate career and focused on children in foster care and in juvenile justice. And I really used sport to try to build rapport with them. I specifically was working with adolescents who were aging out of foster care and didn't have as much support, who were vulnerable to human trafficking and drug abuse, et cetera, homelessness. And so my focus really became on how I can better help these young people navigate transitions in their life, and then ultimately began to specialize in sport. But I would say my really the underpinning of my education and background is in trauma and just walking along life with people who have been through some really hard things.
So often in sports storytelling, traumatic upbringings are glamorized. Media outlets adore a comeback story, one full of adversity and nearly squandered potential. Dr. Sumler reads between the lines of stories like that. She sees sport as an outlet for emotional reform and redirection, as opposed to a distraction from trauma.
It's almost as if I feel the use of sport has been there. We've just been labeling it, I think, a bit more effectively. And so whether it's, the use of sport in underprivileged communities as childcare or the use of sport for role model or skill development, I do get concerned when young folks who've been through hard things rely on sport as their coping outlet, because of course, once you get to the collegiate level, it becomes more of a job. And so if we don't have other coping tools to offset, just being able to go shoot hoops in the gym, or if that becomes your job to shoot hoops well, that's no longer a relaxation tool. And so that's why a lot of, practitioners in the collegiate space are really building basic kind of mindfulness, somatic practices to counteract the fact that they've been using sport for so long as a coping tool. And now it's, become more of a pressure point for them.
Approaching athlete mental health with trauma-informed counseling allowed Sumler an advantage when speaking with youth and student athletes more wary of help-seeking behaviors.
My first job out of college was working at a residential treatment center for children and teens, where I was, on night shift, really supporting their just physical health, because a bachelor's degree in psychology, you couldn't do much clinical work. But it was in that process that I learned really trauma-informed principles. I'm 6 feet tall, Black woman. And so with some of these younger children, especially children from other areas who maybe hadn't been around folks like me, being just mindful of my size, my tone of voice, getting on their level, making eye contact. I learned a lot of those trauma-informed principles hands-on, working with young people. And then as I started working with teenagers, recognizing that those skills were helping me become successful in meeting them where they were. And so it really just continued to build and expand into now where I really care about bringing trauma-informed principles into athletic departments. It starts with positioning myself in terms of removing power dynamics and trying to remove power dynamics, positioning myself to be approachable, being accessible to them, both physically in physical space, but also they know they can text me. And I think early on, there's a lot of communication about, what it will look like to meet with me, times that I'm available. Over time, let's say that there's a couple of guys that we're aware of that have some significant trauma histories. I'm really just trying to build a relationship from afar, and help them see me as a trusting person that when they're ready to talk about, if they're ever ready to talk about it, that I can be there for them. So it's pretty informal and passive, and slowly starts to build until, there's some guys who we don't even talk about the deep stuff, but they're just aware that I'm aware that they have stuff going on. And if they did need support in the future, that I could be there for them. So try to also be mindful of, levels of depth to go in therapy, and especially with, athletes and times of the year. But yeah, overall, I would say it's the way I kind of operate in life. So sometimes I can get stuck on how to name it because it's become so ingrained on just like how I walk into a coffee shop. I'm like, wanting to make eye contact and being mindful of my space and stature and all of that.
Sumler prioritizes building rapport within this community, as many of her athletes are naturally less trusting of positions of authority. It helps her to level the playing field. Sometimes that requires her coming to the playing field.
Say oftentimes it does begin on the court. So I will shoot hoops, especially with our football guys, just to kind of show them that I use it as stress management, but to also just open up that it doesn't have to be this clinical. Like I'll kind of take a lap with them and talk about like, hey, what are you going to do after practice today? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, well, let's think of 3 things you might be interested in trying out and like tell me how it goes the next day. So it's as simple as, you're interested in fashion. Like, what about looking more into that? And really just leaning into their interest. But it can be hard. It's a bit easier in the summertime, of course, but it can be hard to get them to try new things when they've got so much that they're focused on learning and trying to achieve. My biggest thing is, helping people feel safe in their bodies. And so really focusing them on some mind-body techniques, I think would be a really, easy entry point into learning more about, crisis counseling, if you will, and really just how to be aware of your past experiences and how they impact your current state of mind and how your future decisions could be impacted. So again, mindfulness, emotional regulation in terms of interpersonal relationships. The book that I've been reading most recently is The Anxious Generation, which has allowed me to be a bit more empathetic towards COVID and social media and have a more of a curiosity on how we can support young people facing increased anxiety with, more technology and access to more virtual worlds. Yeah, I hate to rattle off just a bunch of books. I'm trying to kind of think of some more just avenues because there's a tons of books you can read, but yeah, I think for me, it really comes down to like knowing you're being safe in your body. So whether that's implementing workout routines, getting to the gym, um, to doing massages, doing acupuncture, like whatever it is that helps you release tension in your body would be a good entry point, I would say.
Sumler further informed her counseling with a PhD in counselor education from Ohio State University in 2024. Now embedded in the athletic department as the Assistant Director of Sports Psychology and Wellness Services, Dr. Sumler's scope of support has narrowed, but flourished. At such an institution, her interpersonal communication skills from a counseling background are able to meld with data to better inform her work. Data-driven emotional regulation points track fluctuations in student-athlete well-being before even the athlete can articulate what's going on.
As a clinician, we use the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 to monitor clinical symptoms of anxiety and depression are kind of the baselines. But because we have so much access to, potentially weights of folks week in, week out, we can identify trends in their stressors kind of related to their appetites and their weights, grades. We've also started looking at like force plate data. Right now, we're working on a research project where we're trying to see if we can parallel force plate data with stressors. And so if someone's how high they're jumping starts to decrease over time, does that correlate with any mental health symptoms that we're also tracking and trying to see the parallel there? Because we know that, with stress in our hips and our midsection can really start to be impaired. And so we are trying to advance in that way. But in terms of the access that we have right now, for me, it's really that sleep and appetite. And if we have some Oura rings or Whoop data, that can be really helpful to try to catch trends a little sooner. I wouldn't say I've used the catapult data incredibly consistently, but we've had a few athletes that were dealing with some anxiety pre and post practice, where looking at heart rate changes throughout practice and having access to that in real time was really insightful. And I could kind of pull over the athlete and say, hey, how are you feeling right now in comparison to where your heart rate's at for some kind of biofeedback in the moment. We don't do a ton of biofeedback just because of the time demands that we currently have, but that would be the ideal, is to really get to use. They're already wearing, so many different wearables for their performance. How can we use that same data to prevent or intervene more appropriately? I would also say any behaviors that are, out of the ordinary for that individual, whether that's, consecutive lateness or, with the role that I have now, I'm just so grateful that I have so much data, but it could be shifts in appetite or, weight trends changing, grades changing. And it really is just any shift in the person's normal functioning leads to just a question. Hey, I noticed that your weight had been dropping. How have you been feeling? Have you had any troubles eating? I noticed that your grades have changed. It's really the open door to the conversation. Or again, like when men say they're feeling very overwhelmed, that really makes me kind of curious about what that means for their sleep and their appetite.
In a post-COVID NIL-influenced atmosphere, she set to work defining her place in the student-athlete support bubble. How does trauma-informed counseling fit in when student-athletes have so many external influences pulling their focus away?
On the teams that I work with, I often am involved in the recruiting processes and sitting across families and parents, and the questions that they have, and especially and I'm thinking about football and basketball. They seem to feel inundated with resources and numbers, and I'm worried. I would say I'm getting the sense that people are less focused on the like social emotional development, less focused on if this school academically, personally has the resources for my student first and student athlete too. So I think we're focusing more on the athletic focused resources versus the is a city even a place that my young person can thrive in, or is this a team that has community building involved in it, or are they kind of more independent? Those are some of the questions I see people asking less of.
From a recruiting perspective, Dr. Sumler had some targeted points that she thinks student athletes should be evaluating when seeking roster spots and learning environments.
It feels as if athletes have more external resources in terms of guidance. And so they, I would say, are leaning on school resources and internal departmental resources a bit less. That maybe because they have the financial means to kind of build their own care team, or due to some of the confidentiality, especially now that, finances are getting kind of wrapped into their participation. So I have sensed that there are agents not in competition with us in terms of guidance, but I think athletes have access to more confidential resources and more external resources that makes them more comfortable when they're making those decisions. At this point, especially across the Big Ten, I'm thinking about the circle of cares are very similar, but the families and the athletes that are asking about how available those resources are these resources that travel with you. I think that's an important question. And so for me, it would be I would really be prioritizing resources where that strength coach, athletic trainer, nutritionist are the only ones for that team, or trying to understand how large their caseload really are. So it's great to have a great strength coach, but if he has 3 or 4 teams, will your athlete get that level of care that you're seeking? And yeah, I would say in terms of the outlier that I would be leaning on is how close are your mental health resources? How close are your mental performance resources? How accessible, are they in the same building? Be asking questions about proximity. What we've learned now is that the more involved and embedded that the clinician is, the least stigma that the athletes have in terms of speaking with them. And so again, going on these recruiting visits, it's great to hear the spiels, but really asking about how the resources are applied.
Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless of if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human in this world going through a hard time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a positive way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. This is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options just in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. If this sounds like something that could help you, there's a link in the show notes to get you started on your therapy journey. It's betterhelp.com/closer mentality. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Because finding a therapist is a little like dating. If you don't really fit with the therapist matched with you, it's easy and free to switch therapists without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/closer mentality. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/closer mentality. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this channel. Did you know that you can purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore? With Libro FM, you can pick from more than 325,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from real booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, you know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports your local community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to squeeze more reading into your busy life. Listen with the free Libro FM app while you do chores, walk the dog, or relax at home. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations from the people who know best, booksellers. Closer Mentality has partnered with Libro FM on a special offer. Through the link in the show notes, you can get 2 audiobooks on Libro FM for the price of 1. Offer only valid for new members in Canada and the US. Thanks to Libro FM for sponsoring this podcast. Dr. Sumler is acutely aware of student-athlete rings of support, especially at a Division I Power 4 institution. She strives to make athletes both aware of their teams and wary of involving extraneous opinions in their own decision-making and mental wellness.
Right now, there's a lot of money on the table. There's a lot of lump sums amount of monies that our athletes are making, but I'm talking to them about longevity and trying to be here for a movement and not just a moment, trying to create change and not just, have this viral moment. And so that has kind of got some buy-in from them, as they recognize that things can come and go so quickly. They've seen it happen into other athletes, but bringing them back to what is your why in terms of this deal or this next chapter, and how can we kind of cushion you with those resources as you continue to grow. But to me, we're right at the beginning of where this is going to go until we really understand the impacts. But that is my concern now, is just the level of money and the younger that they're getting, their ability to make those decisions for themselves and for their own why versus financial means. I am far more okay with uncertainty than I was at the beginning. And I think that's just having walked alongside athletes from, COVID times to coming into the NIL era and a variety of other concerns. I have come to realize that our role is not to be the expert, but is to be a steady force as they are navigating all these changes, which requires us to, do our own care, ensure that we're not getting lost in the tensions and the pools, but is really being that grounding force for them throughout their collegiate career, where they can keep coming to for support as things change. One thing that's sticking out to me is at the beginning, I really wanted to reach as many athletes as possible. And what that, looked like was me, trying to get more folks into therapy, get more folks into performance sessions. And what feels different now is the recognition that our role in our relationship in and of itself is therapeutic. And so I may not meet with everyone on a team individually, but my goal is to have a relationship with everyone on that team. So if and when there is a concern, they can feel comfortable coming to me. So at the beginning, I might have been looking at, is the whole basketball team meeting with me, or, how do we change that? But it's really about zooming out and, again, building a more psychologically safe system, which may mean meeting with me individually, but it could be me passing resources to coaches to be more positive in their interaction. So I think from my beginning work, I have zoomed out into a more holistic view of the role versus kind of being that one-on-one clinician.
Dr. Sumler isn't as worried about the variety of influences as much as the influential voices not working cohesively for the student-athlete's best interests. That's where she sees well-meaning support staff potentially becoming stressful and detrimental to student-athlete success.
The next step that I'm thinking about in terms of care for athletes is that systemic care and ensuring that we don't just have the people in place, because now we've got everybody kind of positioned, but it's how they can all work together effectively. Because what I've also seen is, a few people have noticed the change in behavior or noticed the concern, but kind of tell themselves, oh, well, they're seeing the nutritionist, so I'm sure it's fine. Or, well, I know Charron's around at practice, so I'm sure, they'll get connected that way. But I think we still have to work to be more mental health literate and really being direct about the questions of, are you okay? Do you need some more assistance? That's the piece that I think we're still missing. We have, more people at the table, but I think continuing to ask the questions and being consistently present when they have the answers. What we've noticed now is really even a demand for more consistent programming with our team. So, yes, we're around for the team talks, but really wanting to hold a space where athletes are getting to talk to one another, getting to build cohesion in that way. We throw so many different apps and resources at them, but we're losing the connectivity piece of them just being in a room talking about their feelings. And so I really think, again, we're going to end up going back to the basics because a lot of our athletes, especially with COVID, didn't develop those social skills in terms of conflict management or how to communicate for your needs. And so we're going to have to create spaces to help them practice that in my mind to help them be successful socially and not just kind of transfer when things get hard. I want to give them some more tools. The first part is, being in the right meetings in the right spaces where information is being shared, where trends are being shared, academic meetings, and then it's having a relationship with everybody on the sport performance or who, on that team staff so that, yes, you're right. I can't be the one that sees all of the concerns, but I can be a consultant and, coaches seeing the concerns. But if they don't feel comfortable coming to me, it doesn't really do them any good. So I also focus on the relationship building element of it as well.
Are you an athlete rehabbing from an injury? Are you a coach or athletic trainer seeking additional support for your injured athlete toolkits? KT Tape has exactly what you need. KT Tape is a rehabilitation tape that helps stabilize and compress sensitive areas of the body during exercise. Apply KT Tape to an area either in pain or in recovery and feel the difference. KT Tape is comfortable, stable, and long-wearing. There's tape for all modes of action, from gentle, which is safe for easy activity and everyday use, to pro extreme, for athletes in moderate to high-impact exercise. KT Tape makes water-resistant tape as well for a more adaptable rehabilitation implementation. KT Tape caters to lifelong athletes and focuses on reducing muscle soreness for all users when worn during exercise and up to 48 hours post. Are you an athlete in need of prescription sports goggles or sunglasses? Today's final sponsor may have just the solution for you. A Sight for Sport Eyes was created when founder Shannon Knight saw a niche that was perpetually going unfulfilled. A Sight for Sport Eyes grew out of a need for education surrounding the impact of sport-related eye injuries and their lasting repercussions. A Sight for Sport Eyes runs like a regular optical practice, not an e-commerce store. Their goal is to give you the same high-quality service and name-brand lenses made by the best optical laboratories in the country, geared specifically for athletes and athletic use cases. If you need new lenses or frames, A Sight for Sport Eyes is the perfect place to get them. The links to BetterHelp.com, Libro FM, KT Tape, and A Sight for Sport Eyes are all in the show notes. Now, let's get back to the episode. In the age of NIL, Dr. Sumler has an added stressor to the repertoire of student-athlete insecurities. Financial stability, once a trauma escapable through sports, has resurfaced as, at times, a driving factor in decision-making for student-athletes. It's a trend that Dr. Sumler says toes the line between positive motivation and triggering factor.
An element of concern that has arisen is kind of like salary conversations. So the same way that as employers have a variety of approaches to whether employees should share their salaries with one another, and there's conversations around that. What's happening in locker rooms is kind of the same thing, where there's conversations around, how much schools are going to be paying each athlete and player and playing time. And so I think that'll add an interesting locker room dynamic, kind of cohesion element of monetizing performance, what that will do to the team dynamic. Certainly there's an element of more advanced financial crises. I think our athletes are more involved in some financial situations, in some ways can help more, but in other ways, given the amount of money that they either have made, could make, I think the pressures, the decision-making pressures have changed. So whether it was, I'm trying to think of a silly example back in my time, I don't know, whether or not to take a road trip, to another city. Whereas now, these athletes have access to get to an island and, buy a new car when they get there. And so the level of decision making is, it's the same decision making concerns. They're just louder consequences given the financial access. And then the transferring was not, when I first started, transferring was not as much of a, clear path as it is now. And so with that decision making, I'm seeing athletes, take a shorter amount of time to assess if they want to be at a school or, kind of by midway through the season, they're thinking about what other options they have. Whereas back at the beginning, it was, more of a thought of, okay, next year, this is what I'll do differently.
She alluded to the fact that student athletes can actually use their NIL platforms and personal brands to provide the advocacy work. NIL deals don't have to be about apparel and fancy car dealership collaborations. Student athletes can easily align their personal brands with initiatives that matter. In fact, Dr. Sumler suggests that route to be particularly fulfilling.
Yeah, I think in terms of the NIL platforms, there are certainly companies and brands who are wellness minded. And I think it'd be really cool for an athlete to, kind of say that in my, my NIL deals and contracts, the company has to, have a certain level of mental health awareness or campaigns or acknowledgement of struggles that people face. And so I could see athletes taking a more assertive stance of, I only work with companies that are kind of pro mental health or have resources. Um, Or I think even challenging against like, sharing your mental health story and just kind of sharing more personal life stories and maybe making it less about mental health and just getting people normalized to sharing experiences and storytelling. I think that could be a really cool way to also destigmatize.
It's platforms like this podcast that she suggests athletes use to advocate. You never know the reach of an outlet, and as athlete autonomy and personal branding increases, athletes who turn into storytellers bear a unique responsibility in the spotlight. If you'd like to share your story on closer mentality, shoot me an email at julia@closermentality.com. Thank you so much to Dr. Sumler for sharing such a unique cog in the student athlete support staff wheel. If you'd like to listen to she and I's full interview, it's on the Closer Mentality Uncensored YouTube channel. All other pertinent links are in the show notes as well. I have some more incredible programming to share in 2026, and I can't wait for you all to hear these perspectives. Until then, though, thank you for listening to episode 125 of Closer Mentality. As always, I'm your host, Julia Mellett. See you soon.